Hi, I'm Jim with Twisted Hobbies, and today we're building the Bücker Jungmeister.
Okay, as always, I've printed out my manual and I am ready to inventory my parts, see what I've got, and then start to fold over all my ailerons and rudder and elevator to get them soft and open so they flop around a little more and they aren't quite so stiff. Just be careful when you do this step because you don't want to tear the hinge. If you do, you can put some foam tack into there and that's usually not a problem. Next up, we're going to be inventorying all of the carbon fiber pieces. On this model, there are a ton of them, so I put together this sheet that lists it all out, and that way helps me to keep it all organized. Another thing that you'll see is I referred to this as the Bücker Jungmen on the sheet here, and the manual I think also says that. That's a very similar plane to the Bücker Jungmeister. The Bücker Jungman is a two-seater, but the Jungmeister is what this plane actually is. It is a one-seater, and it's more aerobatic, shorter wingspan. So first thing you see me doing here is gluing together the wings, and if you'll notice, I'm using foam tack. I love foam tack for all my foam-to-foam connections, and then I'm also doing it on top of a piece of parchment paper. I'm getting ready to put in these wing spars, and I scuffed them up with some sandpaper and then rubbed them down with rubbing alcohol to get any oils off. Then you see me doing the dry fit. It wasn't going all the way into the slot, so I had to run my X-Acto blade a little bit along there. I always start with a fresh X-Acto blade on every model, and then I usually change it out because X-Acto blades are cheap. So once I've got the spars in and flush, I'm going to run some CA glue along that joint and then hold it down with something to keep it nice and flat against the table. I do that on both wings. You'll also notice I don't use any kicker on this. I tend not to if I don't have to, because I've run into issues where it warps the wing or it gets all whitish and sort of blooms. So rather than deal with that, I just forego it if I can, which usually I'm able to. Next, we install the standoffs for the bracing on the ailerons and then the control horns on the bottom wing. Dry fit those, get them into place, pretty straightforward. Then we install the gang horns on the top wing. And then next we're going to move on to the bracing for the ailerons. This process is the same obviously for all four of these, and it's nice because the slots are already cut in the aileron, so all you have to do is get the carbon fiber to the right length and then glue it into place. And I like to dip the ends a little bit into the foam tack. You might want to use CA glue for this, it's kind of up to you. The most important part is that it's all kept flat as you're putting it together and that it's consistent for all the pieces. So I'm going to repeat this process on the other three ailerons. You'll see me here putting a partial cut into the carbon fiber rod and then bending it over and kind of kinking it and then getting it into place. That way it's one continuous piece rather than trying to cut it all the way in half and then do the glue in there and have a joint where there's four separate pieces coming together. Now there's only two. Next we're going to be working on the horizontal fuselage, and we're going to be putting the supports along the edge of it. I dry fit it and then I realized that I needed a little bit more room in there to get those to sit flush, so I went back and opened it up just a little bit more with an X-Acto. And then once these horizontal fuselage runners are glued into place, we're going to start cutting the strips that go across the fuselage. And as usual with those, I scuff them up, dry fit them, and glue them into place. Then out of the hardware kit, we're looking for the bracing for the elevator. And we're going to glue a couple of those little pieces on each side of the horizontal fuselage. And you may want to open up the holes on those guides just a little bit because mine was a little snug and it could have benefited from being a little bit looser. So once you got the ones on the fuselage on, then we're going to put them into the elevator and then on each side of the elevator as well. These ones can be really snug on the 3mm rod that goes through, but those ones on the horizontal fuselage, those should be nice and loose, and they were not. Here you see me sanding one of them to open it up a little bit. I may have used a reamer as well, and then I glued it back on, but it was not loose enough. I still had to lubricate it with some graphite. Right here you see me gluing in control horn once I made sure that the rod was centered. And then I'll be sliding on the elevator halves and then gluing those into place. Next up is the lower part of the vertical fuselage, and I just get that lined up, get some foam tack into there, get it into place, use my square, and make sure it's nice and square. Then we're going to be doing the bracing, and we're just going to be looking in the manual for the lengths of each of these, and then cutting them appropriately and putting them into place. There are little pre-cut slots for all of these, and the way that I put them in is I dry fit them and then I dip their ends into some foam tack and then they slide right in. I'm using my square here to make sure that those pieces stay perpendicular as those braces are installed. And then we'll move on to gluing in the reinforcements for the landing gear. Next up, we're going to be installing some of the servos, but in order to do that, I'd like to make sure that they are centered first. So here I quickly set it up and make sure that everything's working. I have a whole video on doing this in the description you can take a look at, but here I've bound my receiver, I've centered my servos, and I checked the motor direction, so everything was good with that. Now I'm ready to install these servos and figure out which side I want the wires to go to. And now we're ready to install the vertical fuselage. And first we need to get that bracing put into there. And as usual on this, we want to make sure that we're putting the glue everywhere it needs to go. I like to lay it down next to it so I can kind of visualize, and then I just squeeze it all together. I'm going to go back with my square and make sure everything is staying square. Next up is going to be the rudder. We're going to insert its control horn and then put it onto the vertical fuselage. Then we're going to move on to the interplane struts that go between the two wings. So I'm going to cut those out, put their stiffeners in, glue them in place. And now we're ready to attach the wings to the plane. First thing I had to figure out is which wing goes where, which one's the top and bottom, and you can tell that the one on the bottom has an extra little notch in it. So that's the bottom wing, that's the top wing. The checkers go towards the outside edge. And you got to be careful of the ailerons because they have the stiffeners in it, so they don't quite sit flat. So we get the fuselage glued onto the wing there, and right in that area at the front of the wing, that's always an area on the biplanes where it's going to be a little stressed, so I like to put some extra glue right there. Then make sure everything's square. And now we're going to start onto the landing gear. Sorry about this being in the way. That's a little better. Okay, so the hardware pieces for the landing gear, they all fit together and come together like so. I just used foam tack on this area because I wanted it to be a little flexible as I was putting it all together. And as you can see, these did come apart a little bit as I was feeding them through the fuselage and through the wings, but that's why I like the foam tack, because you're really able to nudge it until it gets into the right place. So after lots of positioning, I was able to get it set. And then once finally in position, I put some foam tack on the fuselage stiffeners right between the gear struts, and then all the connections where it came together. And then finally CA glue down the lengths in order to lock everything into place. Now where these little reinforcement pieces came into play, I'm not sure if I should have put them on the carbon fiber pieces before I installed them onto the wing, but it's not too big of a deal to just cut a slot in them and then glue them into place once you get them around the carbon fiber piece. That seemed to work just fine for me, but I could have threaded it on before I got it onto the wing. Then we'll move on to the wheels, and I just put the foam around the wheels and then start the assembly for those. There's little caps that go onto the ends, and just make sure you're not gluing the wheel to the axle. Next up, we'll be feeding the carbon fiber supports that go from the bottom wing to the horizontal fuselage, and I do that on all 4 of these. Then I'm going to flip it over, and then we're going to do the same thing from the top. I had to place these in and then trim them to size. It should be pretty close to the right size, but a little trim is often necessary. And now we're going back to the hardware bag looking for the motor mount, and it just gets glued right on. Then we're going to be rolling up the engine cowl. I rolled it a few times. I used a rubber band around it to kind of make it stay in shape. I applied some glue, and then I held it stuck together for a long time, and then it seemed to hold pretty well after that. Applied glue to the horizontal and vertical fuselage, stuck that on, and then we're ready to start on the aileron push rods. And these should be made at 40 millimeters between the hole centers, and I get those lined up, put some CA glue on, hit them with some kicker, and just make sure that those are aligned. Then we're gonna find our servos, put them into place. I usually push them into place to kind of show me where those little tabs are, and then I cut the tabs all the way open with an X-Acto and then glue it all into place. I used to swear by hot glue for installing servos, because that way you could take them out of there easily if they break, but if you're using high quality servos like the Correct Series Pro that come with the kit, then you won't have any of those problems. And then we're gonna install them onto the servo horn for each of the ailerons. These little quick links just have the little brass pin that slides through, and they provide no slop at all. Little pinch with the pliers and they're golden. And now we're going to be assembling the push rods. So I get the end threaded in. This is the adjustable end on the quick connect. I got both of those done, and then I'm going to install it onto the servo horns. This area in here for the elevator servo horn is a little tight, but I'm able to get that servo horn on and then get the quick connect put on. Then we're going to work on the standoffs. And so I turn it all the way upside down, and there's little marks for the standoffs. They're a little hard to see, but they're evenly spaced, so it's not too bad to find them. Just make sure that you're placing them so that they are all facing the same direction, because you don't want to have to pull one out later on. And here I'm putting on the electronics so that I can verify that I am going in the correct direction with my ailerons, and it looks like it's good. Off camera, I went ahead and put on the standoffs for the rudder push rod and installed the servo horn on that. And now I'm just finalizing that, making sure it's centered, dressed up the end a little bit, and then fed on the little brass piece and glued it permanently. Here I'm going to be finalizing the length of the elevator push rod, making sure that it's in the right place. And then trimming the push rod, dressing it up a little, putting it into the brass piece, and then affixing it permanently with CA, just like I did on the other side. This is where we install the motor into the motor mount, just 4 screws, no big deal. Then we're on to the last piece to assemble, which is our gang rods. For these, we're going to be using snap-in links on each of the ends. I measure for length, a little bit of trimming, and then I'm going to dip the ends in a little bit of foam tack, put on the snap-in link, and then slide the heat shrink over that, and it all holds together. Then I clip it into place onto the gang horns, and then repeat the same process for the other side. Then I just make sure that both sides are the same length. And the final thing is a propeller. I always balance my propeller. I have this little prop balancer from Twisted Hobbies. Works great, little tape on it to get it balanced. And then I have an O-ring installer tool. And then we are done. Let's fly it. Okay, we're going to be doing the maiden flight at my airfield. I am going to be sharing the airspace with someone else, so I got to keep an eye on their plane too. So as we take off, the first thing I'm looking for is just some straightforward flight, making sure that it's not turning funny. I do have a little bit of wind here, so that's going to be affecting it. The plane handled really well. It does have a little bit slower of a reaction than I'm used to with things like the cracked pits, but it's kind of refreshing to have everything go just a little bit calmer, a little smoother, a little slower. You're definitely more methodical and have to think through a lot of the maneuvers a little bit more, but what we're really looking for is just making sure that the plane responds as you intend it to respond. So I'm getting some pretty good hover in on it, doing a little torque rolling, a little aileron rolling, and then making sure it's flying correctly. We're also making sure that the center of gravity is in the correct spot. I think that I did have to move it back a little bit more from the position that I currently had it in with the manual suggestion for center of gravity. Please also keep in mind on this maiden flight here, I am not an advanced pilot. I would consider myself to be a novice. I've only had a year and a half of experience. So I'm not going to be able to do a lot of the things that you see some of the more advanced flyers be able to do. I didn't show any of the pre-flight checks that I do, but I definitely make sure that the servos are going the right direction and that nothing's getting bound up as I'm adjusting it. You don't want to throw a plane up in the air and then realize that you have your rudder reversed. I've never done that. I'm just kidding. I've totally done that. I'm flying this plane on a 450 milliamp hour battery and the standard Twisted Hobbies power combo. I really do swear by their power combo because everything just works. This is a pretty calm day. I think I've got a breeze of 4 or 5 miles an hour, which is definitely within what I'll fly. Once it gets to about 10, that's definitely a little much for such a lightweight plane. Anything more than that, then I'm looking for something heavier that's going to be able to penetrate the wind much more than this. I think the two things that I like most about this plane are the graphics. It looks fantastic. A lot of people see it and they really enjoy the way it looks. And I also really like the landing gear. It's nice to not always have to bring it in and do a hand launch or a hand recovery, especially in wind or something like that. Since this first flight, I've put about 30 more flights on the plane, and I haven't had any issues with it. It is a smooth, consistent flying plane. It is definitely relaxing to fly, much more so than some of my other planes that get me a little amped up, a little excited. But I really enjoyed building it. I hope you were helped out by the build video, and I hope you enjoyed flying your Bücker Jungmeister.